Hi there. I made this very simple single page comic of three boys wandering into a cave and discovering a robot monster and it scaring them. Now this is a very straightforward and simple narrative comic that you can make with just a few simple tools that you can find at Walmart. All of the tools that I used in this video I got at Walmart, and I paid less than 20 bucks for all of them. It's very straightforward and very simple, and it's not very high quality art, but it's art that you can make and you can get started making it today. And I'm going to go through the whole process of initial sketches to the sketches on the page to the inking and the painting of this artwork. So these are some of the initial concepts that I used to make this artwork. And you can see the panels really start to develop, and the characters as well start to develop quite a bit. You can see here the end product is much more similar to this final panel here. However, there's a lot of differences in the panel structure and the overall feel of the artwork. First off, let's look at the motion upwards of this circular portion. The circular portion grasps the reaction to the machine, and also this little portion that we'll talk about later on, but in my initial concepts sketches, the arrow or this triangle wasn't touching this far left face, and I decided in the end product to make it touch on this very left hand portion. And again, I'll go into a little bit more detail about why later. But you can just see here how the very first portion of this is just so rudimentary. You can sketch this out in under a minute. Just draw a couple of squares, draw maybe a little box or two here or there, and then sort of fill in more details. You can see the boys, their position shifted to the right and got smaller. This reactionary image shifted up quite a bit until it completely just came off the page. Much more detail as I figured out what I wanted to make, what I wanted this monster to look like, what the hand I wanted it to look like, and how I wanted their reaction to be at the very end of it. So you can just see here how it progressed, how you can just have this super minimal idea in your head. It can be anything, and you can sort of slowly develop it and build it up to make it something a little bit more interesting and just tell a story with a single piece of paper. So let's get started with the sketching here. And the first thing I do is I outline my panels. The panels are the foundation of any comic that you're going to make. So those are basically the first thing that you're really going to want to get onto the page. And I'm not using a ruler here. You don't need one. You don't need to make perfect lines. These lines don't need to be absolutely straight. And one thing you really need to be cognizant of if you're using a pencil rather than a pen to do the initial sketches of your comic is you need to be able to commit to a line. You need to not be afraid to look at a line and say, this is the final product that's going on the page. Right? You can see I'm frequently erasing and sort of changing up how I want to view these boys here. But as soon as I get the foundation down, I just kind of run with it. And so that's the main thing I would encourage you if you're starting out and you're making your first comic is don't be afraid to seriously put a line on the page. I encourage you to sketch, and I encourage you to try and retry your lines and what you want to add to it. But if you're going to add something to the page, don't be afraid to say that this is staying here. So I'm just going to let the rest of this play out as I add these lines, and you can sort of watch my process as I sort of try to freestyle the inside of this cave. I try to make it as busy as possible. This is a really unfamiliar place for the boys, so I really want to hit home this idea that, right, they don't know what they're in. They don't know where they're at, and this is a unfamiliar place to them. So now I'm going to go ahead and just leave it, and it's on 10 times speed, and I'm just going to let this run for the duration of my sketching, and feel free to click through or watch as I go through and finish up this sketch. Now let's move on to the inking. So whenever you ink, you want to try to keep a loose hand. So if you see there, if you noticed there, I actually switched pens. I was using a slightly thicker pen that I needed to, but because this is such a small page, I wanted to switch to obviously a smaller pen to try to get a little bit more information onto the page. And whenever you ink, you're going to have to fully commit. I talked last time during the sketching portion about being willing to commit to something on the page. That's even more intense here. Don't be afraid to throw a line down. Don't be afraid of how it's going to look or if you're going to dislike that line, because you don't need to be a fan of every line that you throw down on the page, right? You don't need to have every line be absolutely perfect. And I'm not using a ruler. I'm not using any special tools. I'm just using just the pen and the paper and what I've already got there, the foundation of my sketch. I'm just going to let the rest of this inking play out, and you can watch how I ink and how I make decisions on the page as it goes out. And I'll see you next whenever I talk about the painting. So whenever you do painting, the order is huge, right? That's one of the most important things that you're going to need to take into consideration when you do watercolor painting is the order in which you do your colors. So the first thing I do are here are some of the stronger colors, like the blue, the dark deep blue of the interior of that energy core, followed by the yellow bright light reflecting from the interior of the cave wall. And then I follow it up with doing a bunch of these vines that are stretching all over the page. Traditionally, you want to do your inking in 3 steps. You want to do your shadows first, then your details, and then your shadows final. You want to finish up with a third layer of shadows. But because this takes place inside of a cave, pretty much the entire thing is shadows. So I wanted to hit some of the highlights first, the things that aren't shadows, before I just did a bathe. The entire page is bathed in shadows following that. And I'm only using a single brush. I've got a little a little cup full of water off to the side of the image that you can't see, that I'm just constantly dipping and going back and forth, changing colors. But as you go on, you just make sure to always be cognizant of what colors are wet and what colors are dry. Because whenever I first started out with watercolor, that was one of the biggest things that I ran into, is I would accidentally mix colors that didn't need to be mixed. I would routinely just, uh, like right here where I'm painting this red, I would I would consistently do things like I would paint the red when the green was still wet, and I get this really weird like purpley looking color covering my page. And I want to take a moment to look at that arm, the arm that takes over the entirety of the second panel, where it's stretching across that robot. And something that you can do with shadows is start when your brush is full of paint and sort of use that as a way to outline the shadow. If you see there, I started with the brush when it was full of paint on the left side of that arm, and then I finished on the right side of the arm. So it creates, I never moved the brush off the page, I never re-dipped it in any ink, but you can see that arm has a really nice sort of shadow to it, to where the left side is bathed in in darker red, while the right side is much brighter, much lighter color. And the same is true for this robot here, where you can sort of dip the paint or dip the brush in the paint first and then paint the darker sections followed by the lighter sections. And that's always something to be mindful of when you're painting with watercolor, is that you're going to run out of paint really fast, but you're still going to have a wet brush. So that's something to really keep in mind when you're doing watercolor is you're going to have two resources to manage, sort of the paint and the water. So that really helps you get very fluid and very blended scenes when you're doing watercolor. So I'm going to just let the rest of this watercolor painting section play out. You can watch as I try to add shadows and go back and add highlights and just see the technique develop as I go through the rest of this page. So here we have the last section that I want to hit, and this is the sort of touch-up section, because whenever you use watercolor, you're going to cover up a lot of the lines that you do. Right? You can see a lot of that line work is pretty faded, and so I try to come back through with the brush pen and sort of touch up those lines. And then I come through with the whiteout pen and I sort of highlight things. You can see I highlight that cave door just there, and I make outlines on a lot of the characters to sort of, break them away from the background. This is one of my favorite portions of the comic here, where I outlined the hand right there. I think that looks beautiful. And the outline of the monster on the second and third panel, where you can see sort of this monster is popping out of the page. It really makes your images pop whenever you're able to sort of outline and highlight in this way. And this is pretty much the end of this section, and I'll finish off with talking about the narration later on. So now that you saw the creation of this, I wanted to go through a little bit of the narration that's being told without a single word being uttered in this page. So first off, You can tell the relationship of these three boys simply by seeing them standing here, right? This first boy here on the left, he's the boy that ends up moving the or activating the machine and the one who initially takes notice of it. He's also a step ahead of the other two boys. You can see that he's probably the leader of this little group, and he's also the one that got them into trouble, and most likely he's the one that got them into this cave to begin with. So he's sort of the leader of this group, the more adventurous, outgoing kind, and you can see that by him being a step ahead. He's got a flashlight. He's the one that first noticed the machine. He's the one that moved and woke it up, essentially. Then you can see this little boy, or the smaller boy in the middle, the green shirt. And if you notice, he's actually carrying a backpack. So he is probably being forced to carry any supplies that the boys want, or also he could have been going somewhere else. Maybe he was going to school and the other boys wanted him to explore this cave with him, and he reluctantly agreed to. So he could have been doing something else, or he could have just been carrying the supplies for the other two boys. It really could be anything. And then this third boy here, he seems to be he's not the boy going most forward, so he's not the leader of the group like this boy. However, he does have a little bit more personality as well to him, other than just being not the leader and not the one carrying the supplies. He's got an almost disinterested look about him, looking off to the side. He's not looking forward like this boy, and he's not looking for things like this one. You see, he is just looking off to the side. Doesn't really seem to care as much as this boy. And also, let's take a look at this cave entrance. What I tried to do here with the cave entrance is I tried to put it in the exact same position horizontally as this energy core or energy cell of the monster. So if you look here, the cave entrance should be visible in this panel, but the only reason that the cave entrance isn't visible is specifically because this monster is metaphorically blocking the way and blocking the exit for these boys. These boys have stumbled across this machine, and now literally on the page and for them, we can't see the exit. Also, I want to show here, you can see how we have this outline of this little mini panel off to the side, and you can literally see how the shrubbery or the vines are covering up the panel. Essentially, these boys are getting trapped inside this cave, and it's literally coming out of breaking the fourth wall and taking over these boys. So it's a little bit of a, I guess, kind of scary, but also very immersive sort of adventurous vibe that it's going for here, where you can see that it's grabbing the panel. And just like this monster is covered up in these vines or these leaves, so are the panels of these boys specifically. And then also I wanted to go back and mention this little point here that I talked about earlier. So if you look at this very first comic panel that I had, this point wasn't off to the left. It was actually way far up here to where, and I wanted to initially put more detail on the monster or the machine, but I ended up moving it to the left, and that's for a very specific way of reading this page. So if you're a reader and you're reading this page, the first thing you're going to see, if we're reading, top down, left to right, the first thing we're going to see is this entrance of the cave, right? We're in a cave. It sets the scene immediately. Then the next thing you're going to see is these boys. So we have a cave, and then we have our main characters in the cave. The first boy that we see is our protagonist. He's the leader of this group. He's the most far forward, and he's the first boy that we see reading left to right. So we have the setup in the cave. We know who our protagonist is. We know who our main characters are. And then we have a reaction, right? The cave is grabbing these boys, specifically this one, and we see this reaction first. Now, we don't know what he's reacting to, and maybe he doesn't know either, but we're seeing his reaction probably in the way that he's feeling this reaction. And then if we go down, 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 we get to this point right here. And this is the next point that we see, and it's almost instantaneous, right? And that's why I wanted to move this over. I didn't want the next portion that the reader saw would be the monster. I didn't want them to see that just yet. Instead, they have this instantaneous blow to their vision, what they see immediately. And I try to convey this sort of instantaneous with it. We don't have enough time to react because it's a specific point. That's like one line of a page, right? So we have an instant just moving some vines out of the way, just getting those out of the way so you can see what we're even looking at. And then the very next instant, the very next line of this page, so to speak, is the monster reacting. Right? He Before the boys are even able to know what's going on, he's already trapped them. And then take a look at this hand, right? His hand is just kind of coming up in sort of a grabby type motion, but he's also not just doing that, but his hand is looming over these boys, right? From the viewer's perspective, we can see that this hand is taking over a large portion of these boys, right? His hand is bigger than any one of their heads. So, from their perspective, they're just seeing the monster. But from our perspective, the reader's perspective, we're seeing the monster, right, cover up the entrance of the cave and his hand looming over these boys. We have no idea how they're going to get out of the situation. We have no idea what they're going to do to react. And that kind of opens up the reader's mind, right? Because this is just a single page, you don't need to tell a full story. But we have an introduction, we have a main character, we have some conflict of him looking over, we have this instantaneous big moment of the monster waking up, and it's looming over them. So we have the climax here, the introduction establishment shots, we have sort of the conflict beginning to arise, and the climax. And this can all happen in a single page. You can have characterization, you can have shadows, you can have them reacting to things within a. See, we have multiple different reactions of this one boy. This boy is seen in 3 different panels, and he's got different facial expressions for each. Here, he's just kind of looking around, trying to find something interesting. He finds something interesting, he's reacting to it, sort of a puzzled look on his face, and then fear. So you have multiple different reactions that he has. And this boy, I want to take a look at this boy specifically. He's looking to the right here, uninterested. He's uninterested in what this boy is looking at or what this boy is looking at. But you can see he does a 180 turn of his head, flips it over, and staring directly at the monster, right? So you have this uninterested boy, but because of this looming threat, this threat that's just hanging over them, he's instantly pulled into the action. And this boy, his hands are more relaxed here. You see how they're farther apart to the side of him. He clenches them up. They're much closer and tighter to his chest, like he's gripping onto this bag for dear life, as if it's some sort of safety net. So I just want to convey to anybody who's out there wanting to get into writing, wanting to get into comic book creation, you can do it with a single page, right? You can convey an entire story about 3 boys going through a cave and finding a huge monster. Something that could be an entire movie of some kind, like Iron Giant or something, just an entire movie, can be conveyed, a large portion of it, just on a single page of paper. You can have characterization, you can have development, you can have plot, you can have reactions, you can have everything, just all in a single page of paper. So I'd encourage you guys to really push the limit of what you can convey with just a single page of paper. So if you've gotten to this point in the video, I really appreciate it, and thank you for watching. And I encourage you to go out and make your own art.